Casi no hablo español. Hey guys, it's Holly, and I'm pretty sure the best way to kick this video off is by giving you a short rundown of where exactly I was during the first 18 years of my life. So here we go. I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, the youngest of 5 kids. A few months later, my parents decided to move to a small town in the state of Veracruz in Mexico called San Juan del Rio, also known as Rafael Delgado. All of this is due to the work of my dad, which has to do with the people who speak Nahuatl. They are the descendants of the ancient Aztecs. When I was 3, we moved to Tucson, Arizona, which is where I remember becoming aware of my own existence. When I was 6, we moved to Puebla, Mexico, where I was enrolled in a private school, had to repeat kindergarten because I didn't speak Spanish. We stayed there for 4 years and I did kindergarten twice, 1st and 2nd grade. Then we moved back to Tucson, where I took a test to get back on track. I skipped 3rd grade and went ahead and did 4th and 5th. Then we moved back to a town called Orizaba in the state of Veracruz, very close to San Juan del Rio, where I did 6th grade at a public school called Leona Vicario, and then switched over to a different school because it was time for secondary school, aka 7th grade. This was at a private school called Morelos. Then we moved back to Tucson. I did 8th grade. It was basically the worst year of my life at Coronado Middle School. Then I went to CDO for 9th and 10th, 2 years in a row at the same school. It was amazing. I couldn't even believe it. Then my parents decided to move to Oaxaca, where I went to a school called Blaise Pascal. After that, I was assuming that we would go back to Arizona because that's where all of my siblings had graduated and my parents had told me that I would too. But then they changed their mind and decided to go to Orizaba, Veracruz again, where I did 12th grade, also known as Tercero de Prepa in Mexico, at a school called Univo, which is also a university. So as we were moving to Puebla, we took a 3-day road trip lugging a trailer with all of our stuff behind us. I remember having these huge fluorescent pink flashcards that had different drawings and different Spanish words on them. The only word I remember is montaña, for mountain. I remember my mom sending me to my first day of school at the Colegio Americano with 2 words in my repertoire: jugar, to play, and comprar, to buy, which seems bizarre and it might be incorrect because why would my mom teach me how to say to buy if I had no money? Anyway, the point is I didn't know Spanish and it was highly intimidating walking into this classroom and seeing a bunch of kids and hearing them say all of these things that sounded so precise and not being able to understand a word. It was like, hola, ¿cómo te llamas? Vamos a jugar. I have memories of specific moments as I was learning Spanish that first year. The first one is asking my dad how to say that's how I was born. And that's because everybody would ask me about a birthmark that I had in my eye. And so I just wanted to have a concise answer to give everyone. So my dad told me it was así nací. And so anybody that would be pointing at my eye and saying, you know, blah, 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 I'd be like, así nací. The next phrase that I learned was casi no hablo español, which means I barely speak any Spanish. And it was very convenient just to throw out at random when anyone was saying anything to me that didn't make sense. I would just be like, casi no hablo español. I even remember getting a little tricky and using that one when I already started to understand. I was standing up on one of the swings and I knew that we weren't supposed to do that. And so the guy that was like the referee or whatever at recess blew his whistle and was like, bájate de ahí. And I was like, casi no hablo español. One day I remember this girl Mariela pointing at me and saying a phrase and laughing, and then the entire class catching on and repeating the same phrase and laughing. It seemed kind of lighthearted, but I still really wanted to know what they were saying. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna memorize this phrase and I'm going to ask my dad. And I went home and I was like, hey daddy, what's no tienes ceja? And he was like, doesn't have eyebrows? I'm like, all the kids were laughing at me saying I don't have eyebrows, but I do have eyebrows. And he said, well, honey, you know, they're pretty hard to see because they're so blonde. And I was like, but there's blonde girls here in Mexico too. And he said, yes, but they usually have eyebrows that you can see. I also remember one really funny story where all of my little friends from kindergarten every day at lunch would take me to go play with my one friend that understood me. And her name was Raquel. She was also from the US. What up, Raquel, if you're watching? And one day, one of the girls, Adi Dorantes, was like, you know what, no, she's gonna sit with us. And I remember like, I was at that point where I kind of knew what was going on, but I didn't fully understand. And so I saw that they were kind of fighting for me, which felt kind of cool, but at the same time I was like, okay, I don't know how to make everyone happy. What am I supposed to do? And it escalated very quickly, and suddenly, next thing you know, they have both my arms outstretched and they're pulling them in either direction in the sun, and I'm sitting there like, ah, what am I supposed to do? I'm pretty sure my Mexican friends won the battle, and from then on I sat with them. It was also really interesting because all the kids at this school were there to learn English. So all of their parents saw the value in them learning English from a young age. And so while they were learning English, I was learning Spanish at the same time. And I was also learning different ways to speak English. We would occasionally do little plays for our parents just to show them how well we were doing with our learning. And I remember once I was supposed to be the birthday girl. So all the kids were arriving, knocking on the door, and I would open it and they'd say, "Happy birthday, Holly, do you like it?" And it was so adorable. And I would, say my lines and be like, "Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you so much. Come in." And all the kids would be like, "Maestra, no le entiendo. O sea, no se le entiende." And even I noticed it. My tongue sounded too floppy compared to the way that they were speaking English. So I just learned to say it the way that they were saying it so that they would understand me and we wouldn't have any issues. My dad was like, "Why did you speak English like that?" And I was like, "Oh, that's how we have to speak here." The cool thing is that I was so submerged and so surrounded by the language that I was able to pick it up within about 6 or 7 months. I remember they even had me be the master of ceremonies, or maestra de ceremonias, for Mother's Day or Parents' Day. I just remember learning this line, "Gracias mami y papi y muchas felicidades." And I had it on a big piece of paper and I was supposed to memorize it so I could say it on the microphone in front of the whole school. And my brother was just having a heyday making fun of me. "Gracias mami y papi y muchas felicidades." All right, let's cut to 6th grade. I'm 12 years old. I'm going to a public all-girls school. My mom figured this would be an amazing idea because I did not like boys. Not sure where she got that idea, but it's all good. I had this super classic red plaid uniform with socks up to my knees, the whole works. And at that school, our teacher, La Maestra Clarita, taught all of the subjects. Math, history, social studies, science, whatever you can imagine, she taught it. One day we were in math class. I'm sure I had only been at the school for like 2 weeks. And she asked for volunteers to come to the board to solve some long division problems. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm all about it." So as I'm doing my problem on the board, I hear a bunch of the girls say, "Maestra," I'm just gonna say all this stuff in English even though you know it was in Spanish. "Teacher, what's she doing? She's doing it wrong." And my teacher was like, "You guys, don't worry. She's doing it the way that they do it in the United States. They're a lot slower there." And I was like, "Excuse me? That's the last time somebody's gonna call me slow. Thank you very much." Basically, what I was doing was the way that you're taught to do long division in the US, which is figuring out how many times this number goes into this number and putting that number up here and then multiplying this number by this number and writing it down. So it would be like 4 goes into 17 4 times, 4 times 4, and then you write 16, and then you put the line and you go, "Oh, 1 is left over," and then you carry the next number. Well, that's not how they do it in Mexico. They do that all in their head. So they say, "Oh, 4 goes into 17 4 times. 4 times 4 is 16. To reach 17, you need 1. Boom. And they immediately write the 1 without needing to go through that extra step. Because they're super awesome and super quick, and clearly, I needed to step up my game. I also learned how to do square roots with no calculator at that school. I'm telling you, they are very, very advanced in mathematics. Now, something really interesting happened, and I found out about it because I was best friends with this girl named Liz. She told me that every time Maestra Clarita would send me out of the classroom to go do some random errand, which it didn't happen that often, but it probably happened at least 10 times, she would actually gather all the girls together and be like, "You guys, you cannot let a girl from the United States beat you." And honestly, it's not like I was even getting the best grades in the class, and I'm sure she meant well, but it just, I don't know, seemed kind of weird when I heard that from Lisa. I'm like, wait, is she pitting everyone against me, or like, what's going on here? Maybe in her mind she was trying to use me as motivation, but again, there were other much more stellar students that she could have used as examples. Not really sure why it had to be about Mexico versus the US, but anyway. Speaking of grades, I got pretty good grades for a while there, and something that comes along with that is having the privilege of being in the escolta, which basically is a group of 5 girls in this case that march around with the Mexican flag. One of them gets to hold the flag, one of them shouts all the commands, and you march around in the patio on Mondays to do a ceremony honoring the flag, basically. So the 5 girls with the highest grades in 6th grade, that week got to be in the escolta is what it's called. And in this case, I got to be the one that held the flag, the abanderada. My mom was actually at this ceremony. I don't think parents were invited all the time, but this particular time they were. And she said that the ladies in front of her were kind of like, chatting among themselves, and they were like, "Yeah, they really just have her there because she's blonde." And my mom said, she was like, "Excuse me, no, they have her there because she worked her butt off and got good grades." Again, she resisted, but she was like, "Holly, you have no idea. I really wanted to tell them that." I'm like, "Oh man, I'm so glad you didn't. Something that really impressed me about 6th grade was how much dictation and memorization happened. So you didn't even necessarily need a textbook. The teacher would just be like, okay, get out your notebooks and just start talking, and you have to write down every single thing she says. It was really an interesting way of getting a lot of information into your head. And again, memorization, I mean, we memorized everything. The periodic table of elements, which I know in Spanish, not in English, hidrógeno, helio, litio, berilio, boro, carbono, nitrógeno, etc., etc., etc. We learned the capitals of all the states of Mexico, all the countries in the world, I think. At least we did all of the Middle East and Africa. I even to this day remember a presentation I did about the Olmecs. We learned 8 verses of the Mexican national anthem. I mean, I'm telling you, you get a lot of information crammed into your little head. Another really random anecdote happened with this girl, Marcela. At recess, I walked out of the classroom and saw her sitting on a bench with another girl, and they were sitting there like this. And I was like, what the heck are they doing? And I heard her say, just keep scratching and you'll get black. They had one of my hairs. What? Something I thought was really cool and seemed to happen across the board was that there was a level of curiosity about me, about my life, about life in the US. You know, I remember even in 6th grade, some of the girls, if they saw like something I was wearing or something I brought, they'd be like, is this from the US? And I definitely noticed a huge contrast when I would move back to Arizona and, you know, the kids would be like, oh, you're new, where are you from? And I'd be like, oh, well, I've been living in Mexico. And they'd be like, New Mexico? And I'd be like, no, Mexico. And they'd be like, oh. You know, why aren't we more curious as Americans? Like, why do we not care where people are from, where people have been living, what life is like somewhere else? If we jump to 7th grade, I was back in a school with boys and girls. So many kids would come up to me with lyrics of songs in English written out on a piece of paper by hand, painstakingly. Imagine, they're sitting there listening and writing it down, and all they wanted was for me to translate the lyrics so they could find out what these songs were saying. How cool is that, right? That never happened in the US. Nobody wanted to know what songs in Spanish said. Where's that curiosity? Why doesn't it go both ways? I'm actually impressed that anybody even liked me in 7th grade because, to be honest, I was so over moving at that point that the first couple days of school, all I did was show up, go to my desk, and whenever we weren't in class, put my head on my arms and wait for the next teacher. People would be like, hey, what's your name? And I'd be like, Holly. And they'd be like, oh, Holly what? And I'd be like, Holly Grace Marie Tuggy. After a few days, I finally warmed up to everybody, but it's like, the fact that they even cared and didn't write me off as some snob is amazing. There is something that really impacted me in 7th grade, and it's probably not as big of a deal as it felt to me at the time. It all happened during the Cultural Sports Week, which is super fun. It happens somewhere in the spring, and basically it's like a week off from school, but you still have to go, and you participate in all kinds of sports and activities, and you just kind of enjoy time with your fellow classmates. And all of us from the secundaria, which is 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, had gone over to the preparatoria, which is 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, to hang out and spend the week with them. And I remember one particular game where we had to tie balloons around our ankles and jump around and try to pop everyone else's balloon, right? So I was like, I am going to rock this, and I spent the whole time hopping and stomping on other people's balloons. And long story short, it went from about 50 people, you know, participating to just me and one other guy. So imagine the final 2 contestants. We have in one corner, little 12-year-old girl from the secundaria and a big old, probably 17-year-old boy from the prepa. And I remember thinking, man, I can really win this thing. This is awesome, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden, the entire school started chanting. Now, what do you think that they would chant? They could have made it about, you know, secundaria versus prepa. They could have made it about boys versus girls. They could have made it about, you know, just us as individuals. I would have expected or hoped that maybe my class would support me. But no, they all started chanting in unison, Mexico, Mexico, Mexico. And in that moment, it hit me like a ton of bricks. They're chanting Mexico, and it's not for me. I am not a part of Mexico. They're chanting that for me to get stomped on. And I felt so lame for having even thought that maybe everyone saw me just as, another Mexican, another individual. It didn't really matter that I didn't show up to Mexico waving the American flag, telling everybody about where I was from. I just tried to blend in and learn the language. But still, they saw me as an outsider. And in that moment, nobody was rooting for me. And to be honest with you guys, I wanted to cry and I immediately lost. And I ran away and cried where nobody could see me. And I'm actually really, really, really grateful for that experience, because what it taught me is that happens everywhere. I mean, seriously, they weren't even bullying me. They weren't even, purposefully making me feel bad. And I felt such a level of rejection. Now imagine a kid that actually gets called a racial slur, that gets told to go back to their country. I mean, how insensitive can we be, honestly? We're all just humans. We're all just residents of the world. In conclusion, oh man, I am so, so grateful that I got to grow up in Mexico. I feel like it has broadened my horizons even more than I can articulate. And again, it's by no virtue of my own. I was lucky enough to step outside of my comfort zone, not only about learning a new language, but learning how to adapt to a new culture, trying to understand a new perspective, and not be part of the norm or the status quo. Being an outsider in someone else's culture helped me understand a little bit more about what it's like for someone else who's an outsider in my own. I'm so grateful to everyone in Mexico who received me with open arms, who was curious about me, who cared about me, who asked me questions, who wanted to know more. To everyone who was welcoming and inviting and thoughtful and caring, I will never forget. And yes, I did get stared at and pointed at and singled out on many occasions, especially in cities like Orizaba, where at that time hardly any foreigners lived. I remember walking down the street once and there was a couple, across the street, and they're like, "Mira la güerita." I'm like, "Hi, right here. I can hear you." But they weren't singling me out to make me feel bad. They were just intrigued and interested. I will always be grateful for the time that I spent in Mexico, for all the friendships that I made, and for all of the amazing people that opened up their hearts to me and made me want to open up my hearts to them. There were a lot of moments where I felt like I was basically Mexican, but there were key moments where people reminded me that I wasn't. I don't really feel like I'm from there, but I don't feel like I'm from here either. I'm kind of in this weird limbo where I'm grateful to have been able to experience both. But I have to say,